I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. President Obama announced an agreement with congressional Republicans in December. It would extend for 2 years the tax cuts put in place by former President George W. Bush. The tax cuts were to end in January. The compromise extends current income tax rates for all Americans for 2 years. That includes rates for the richest Americans. The agreement also cuts workers' Social Security taxes by 2 percentage points. Social Security is retirement insurance paid by almost all American workers and employers. The so-called payroll tax holiday would save a family earning $50,000 about $1,000 a year. For the president, the most important part of the compromise was the extension of aid payments to unemployed Americans for 13 months. In November, the jobless rate increased by 0.2% to 9.8%. Economists say payments to unemployed people directly help the economy because they spend the money immediately. This has led some experts to call the agreement a stimulus measure meant to improve the economy. President Obama said he accepted the compromise because he wanted to help unemployed Americans. But the president faced strong opposition from his own party. Some Democrats objected to keeping tax cuts for the rich at a time when the government is struggling with deep budget deficits. The extension of the tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans is expected to cost about $80 billion over 2 years. The deal also includes tax cuts aimed at middle-income Americans and businesses. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said Republicans support the deal. He said it was an important step to take for the American people. Before the agreement, Senate Republicans had threatened to block other measures unless the tax cuts for the richest Americans were extended. Some Democrats were disappointed that President Obama agreed to the compromise. In 2008, he campaigned on the promise that he would continue tax cuts for the middle class. But he proposed to raise income taxes on families reporting $250,000 or more in taxable income. Later in December, both houses of Congress passed the tax bill, and President Obama signed it into law. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. In early April, President Obama announced his plans to seek re-election in November of next year. In an email to supporters, Mr. Obama said, "The race may not reach full speed for a year or more." But he said the work of building the campaign must start today. Some of that work will depend on how many jobs are created in the months ahead. Mr. Obama welcomed a report that the United States economy added 216,000 jobs in March. The unemployment rate dropped 0.1% for the second straight month. The unemployment rate edged down to 8.8% the lowest in 2 years. And some economists say this spring may be the start of better news to come. Consumer spending has been increasing. Stephen Hess is a political scientist who studies the presidency at the Brookings Institution in Washington. He says the next election will more than anything else depend on employment in the United States. Labor Secretary Hilda Solis pointed out that the economy has added jobs for 12 months in a row. She says the economy has added 1.5 million private sector jobs. But, she added, we need to continue to not lose sight of where we need to go to increase opportunities for people to get employed in new jobs. President Obama has filled a top job in his party as he prepares to seek a second term. He chose Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida to head the Democratic National Committee. She replaces Tim Kaine, who plans to run for the Senate from Virginia next year. Among Republicans, former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty recently formed a committee to explore a presidential campaign. Several other Republicans are also considering races for their party's nomination. The latest jobs report showed that 13.5 million Americans remained unemployed in March. Another concern is that oil prices remained over $100 a barrel. High energy prices could threaten the recovery from the recession. In another development, Portugal became the latest member of the European Union with heavy debts to request emergency loans. Portugal joined Greece and Ireland, which have also received aid. Portuguese opposition parties refused to accept budget cuts proposed by Prime Minister José Socrates. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. For more ways to learn American English and stay informed every day, go to voaspecialenglish.com from your computer or mobile device.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. The International Monetary Fund has raised its prediction for world economic growth to 4.6% this year. That is a half percentage point higher than the estimate in April. The IMF credited expansion in Asia and growing demand in the United States. But the lender's chief economist also warned that downside risks have risen sharply. President Obama talked about the importance of building exports as a way to create jobs and economic growth at home. He said, American exports grew almost 17% over the first 4 months of this year, compared to the same period last year. Part of this, of course, is due to the global recovery. But we are also moving forward on improving conditions for America's exporters. Mr. Obama relaunched the President's Export Council. The group includes business and labor leaders who will advise on trade issues. The government reported that private employers added only 83,000 jobs in June. Unemployment remains high even after 6 months of job growth. As the president pointed out, there are still 5 unemployed workers for each job opening. Export-related jobs, he said, pay 15% more than average. In 2008, American exports supported almost 7% of all jobs, including 1/3 of jobs in manufacturing. In January, in his State of the Union speech, President Obama promised to double exports in 5 years. In his comments in July, he said the United States must work to remove trade barriers and open new markets. Mr. Obama said the United States offers some of the world's lowest barriers to trade and expects free and fair access to other countries in return. In late June, the World Trade Organization ruled that Airbus received billions in illegal European aid. The ruling was a victory for its American competitor, Boeing. American lawmakers have also long complained that China suppresses the value of the yuan to lower the price of its exports. China recently promised to let the yuan trade more freely against the dollar. China passed Germany to become the world's top exporting country last year. The United States was third. Some American companies have been doing well in developing markets. For the first time, General Motors announced higher sales in China, the world's largest car market, than in the United States. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. President Obama has been seeking support for his $447 billion jobs plan. The American Jobs Act calls for cutting wage taxes on most businesses. It seeks to prevent public employees like teachers, police, and firefighters from losing their jobs to budget-cutting measures. And it calls for more federal spending on roads and transportation infrastructure to help create jobs. In October, the Senate blocked a vote on the full bill. President Obama said he would seek votes on different parts of his jobs plan. Mr. Obama and his wife, Michelle, traveled to North Carolina and Virginia as part of efforts to seek support for his jobs plan. The Republican majority leader in the House of Representatives said some parts of the bill are like those in a plan put forward by the Republicans. Eric Cantor urged President Obama to find common ground with House Republicans. We want the president to work with us. We want him to stop campaigning. Let's go find the things that are in common between this plan and his. Republicans in Congress offered their own plans to improve job growth earlier in the year. They have called for cutting tax rates and limiting government rules on businesses. Also, in October, Congress passed free trade deals with South Korea, Colombia, and Panama, and the president signed them into law. Both Mr. Obama and congressional Republicans agree the deals should create jobs at home and open markets to American exports. United States trade officials say every additional $1 billion in new exports supports 6,000 additional jobs. Last year, exports to South Korea alone stood at about $39 billion. But the president says a lack of jobs continues to hurt economic growth. The unemployment rate held at 9.1% in September. The economy added over 100,000 jobs during the month. But economists say that is not enough to markedly bring down the jobless rate. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. Our programs are a way for people to read, listen to, and learn American English and much more. You can download transcripts and MP3s of our stories at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter at VOA Learning English.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. President Obama is proposing rules to limit the size of big banks and the risks they can take. He wants to prevent banks from using government-insured deposits to make risky investments. He also wants to keep them from owning hedge funds or private equity funds. Banks took big losses as they traded mortgage-backed securities that went bad. That helped create the financial crisis. Bank shares fell after the president's announcement in January. His earlier efforts at financial reform have faced strong opposition from financial companies and some members of Congress. In the Senate, 60 votes are needed to prevent unlimited debate on a bill. But the Democrats lost their 60th vote. In January, voters in Massachusetts elected a Republican to finish the term of Ted Kennedy, who died in August. Scott Brown opposes the health care legislation in Congress. His election could also affect other areas, like climate change legislation and reforms in the financial system. A separate development in January could affect future elections. The United States Supreme Court cleared the way for unlimited spending by businesses and labor unions in political campaigns. The court voted 5-4 to end a ban on the use of corporate money to pay for independent campaign ads for or against candidates. The court said the restriction on political speech violated the free speech rights guaranteed by the Constitution. But President Obama said the decision will reduce the influence of average Americans. He called it a major victory for powerful interests like big oil companies, Wall Street banks, and health insurance companies. He directed his administration to talk with congressional leaders from both parties to develop a forceful response. Elections for Congress are this November. The next presidential election is in 2012. January 20th marked Barack Obama's first anniversary in office, but the Republican victory in liberal Massachusetts was seen in large part as a sign of voter anger across the country about the economy. Unemployment has doubled in 2 years to 10%. Many people are angry that they struggle while the government rescued big banks. Some banks took losses last year, but others earned record profits. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. In September, President Obama proposed new measures to lift the economy. The central bank, in its latest report, said there was continued growth in the past several weeks, but with widespread signs of slowing. Congressional elections are November 2nd. One new survey showed that 49% of likely voters think Republicans should control Congress. Other polls find that about 60% of Americans think the country is going in the wrong direction. President Obama gave a speech near Cleveland, Ohio. He proposed a tax plan for businesses that make capital improvements, like buying new equipment. The president said, "And I'm proposing that all American businesses should be allowed to write off all the investment they do in 2011. He said this will help small businesses upgrade their plants and equipment and will encourage large corporations to start putting their profits to work." Mr. Obama also proposed to permanently extend a tax credit for research and development. And he offered a plan for rebuilding and modernizing America's roads, rails, and runways. He said it would create jobs and improve transportation. The plan would cost $50 billion, but he promised it would not add to the budget deficit over time. The president spoke in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Both speeches were in the Midwest, an area hit hard by the recession. He said almost every Republican in Congress is saying no to his ideas. But retiring Senator George Voinovich of Ohio told the Washington Post that he planned to help push a bill through the Senate. That bill, supported by the president, contains measures to help small businesses. Still, there is disagreement over the future of the tax cuts approved under President George W. Bush. These are set to end this December. President Obama wants to extend the tax cuts only for families that earn less than $250,000 a year. Republicans oppose ending the tax cuts for higher earners. They say it would hurt small businesses. Democrats argue that few small businesses earn enough for their taxes to go up. Congress passed a big stimulus bill shortly after the president took office last year. But there is little that his newest proposals could do to help the economy before November. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and iTunes at VOA Learning English.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. In early July, an oil pipeline broke under the Yellowstone River in the western state of Montana. The Yellowstone is America's longest undammed river. The spill happened downstream from Yellowstone National Park. The burst pipe spilled as much as 1,000 barrels of crude oil, more than 160,000 liters, into the river. Workers shut off the ExxonMobil pipeline, and the company continued to clean up the spill. But the river was at flood levels and flowing quickly, carrying oil downstream into wetlands, fields, and yards. ExxonMobil spokeswoman Claire Hassett said local officials had ordered a temporary shutdown of the pipeline in May to check on its condition. They were concerned with heavy rains and rising waters. But she said, "We determined that it was safe to operate and we don't know what has caused this leak." Susan Casey Lefkowitz is with the Natural Resources Defense Council, an environmental group. She says the spill shows the dangers of mixing pipelines and waterways, especially when they are running under some of the most precious river systems that are important not just for wildlife, but also for our communities. The Yellowstone River is critical for irrigation, for example, and so it serves the needs of a lot of farmers and communities along its path. Andy Black heads the Association of Oil Pipelines, an industry group whose members include pipeline owners and operators. He says, "We have processes both within companies and at the associations to share learning and best practices and pursue the goal, which is zero accidents." Mr. Black says the industry does not need more federal and state rules. The regulations cover the major causes of pipeline failures, and we do not see any gaps. Susan Casey Lefkowitz disagrees. One concern, she says, is the future of the Ogallala Aquifer, a major source of water for America's Central Plains. A proposed pipeline called Keystone XL would cross the Ogallala to carry oil produced from tar sands in Canada for processing in Texas. Ms. Casey Lefkowitz says, ironically, it would actually cross the Yellowstone River, where the spill just happened. For VOA Special English, I'm Mario Ritter. For more programs and activities for learning English, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. BP is one of the world's largest energy companies. It reported a profit of about $6 billion in the first 3 months of this year. That was more than double compared to a year ago. Now, BP faces growing political pressure over the worst oil spill in American history. Oil has been flowing from its damaged well in the Gulf of Mexico since April. But the company, formerly called British Petroleum, also faces growing financial pressure. Investors fear the long-term costs for cleanup, recovery, and fines. BP's market value fell more than $60 billion as its share price fell by as much as a third. On June 3rd, BP was finally able to cut a damaged pipe at the well using robotic vehicles. The cut was not exactly as hoped, but it was progress. Crews then turned to placing a cap over the pipe, not to stop it, but to direct at least some of the oil to ships on the surface. The leak is about 1,500 meters under the sea. Yet it may not be fully controlled before August. Workers are drilling 2 relief wells in an effort to ease pressure on the damaged well. President Obama returned to the Gulf for his 3rd visit since the disaster began. The Deepwater Horizon, an oil and gas drilling rig, exploded on April 20th. In June, Attorney General Eric Holder announced criminal as well as civil investigations. He said, "The Department of Justice will ensure the American people do not foot the bill for this disaster and that our laws will be enforced as much as possible." By some estimates, the cost of the cleanup could reach $37 billion. The owner of the rig, the Swiss company Transocean, has asked to have its responsibility limited to $27 million. The request is based on a law from 1851, but the Justice Department says that is not enough. The government could also use violations of other federal laws, such as the Clean Water Act, to collect money for the spill. Oil has already reached more than 100 kilometers of coastline in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, and it threatens the west coast of Florida. Areas of the Gulf have been closed to fishing, but job losses in the fishing industry are not the only worry. The Atlantic hurricane season officially began June 1st. Some people worry that officials could take their land if it becomes polluted by oil in a storm. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. A major reform of the American system of health care and insurance has moved farther in Congress than ever before. President Obama wants a final bill passed by the end of the year, but a difficult road still lies ahead. On November 7th, the House of Representatives passed a bill with an estimated $1 trillion price over 10 years. The President called the vote historic. President Obama said, "The Affordable Health Care for America Act will provide stability and security for Americans who have insurance. It will provide quality, affordable options for those who don't. And it will bring down the cost of health care for families, business, and the government while strengthening the financial health of Medicare." But 39 Democrats voted no, and only one Republican, Joseph Cao of Louisiana, voted yes. The bill passed with just 2 more votes than required. Republicans say the plan would add to the nation's debt, raise insurance costs, and expand government involvement in health care. Republican Representative Joe Barton from Texas said, "So there is a choice: bigger government, more mandates, more control, less freedom, or lower costs, more opportunity, more freedom, or more choice. I vote for more freedom." The bill aims to provide health coverage to 36 million Americans. That would raise the nation's coverage rate to about 96%. The most disputed part of the bill is a public option for individuals and small businesses. The government would compete with private plans by offering its own insurance, based on payment rates negotiated with providers. The House bill would raise taxes on high earners to help pay for the plan. It would also cut $400 billion from health programs for the retired and poor, money that supporters of the bill say is now being wasted. Most Americans would have to buy insurance or pay a fine. The government would help the needy. All but the smallest businesses would have to offer insurance for their workers or pay a tax. Some small businesses could receive tax credits to help with their costs. Insurance companies could not deny or cancel coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. And the industry would lose its protection from anti-competitive laws. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. You can read more about the healthcare debate at voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. 2 American rulings could change how information is controlled online and in our bodies. In April, a federal appeals court in Washington ruled that current laws limit government power over internet traffic. The court rejected an order against America's biggest cable company. In 2007, officials ordered Comcast to stop interfering with file sharing programs used by its internet customers. Comcast said big files slowed its network. All 3 judges agreed that the Federal Communications Commission had no legal basis to tell Comcast what to do. The FCC supervises communications by radio, television, wire, satellite, and cable. But its power over internet and wireless communications has long been questioned. Now, without changes in the rules, network providers could slow or block services of competitors. The decision came just weeks after the FCC announced its National Broadband Plan to provide faster, lower-cost connections for almost all Americans. The FCC says the court in no way disagreed with the importance of preserving a free and open internet. The agency could seek new powers to regulate internet service and enforce net neutrality. That is the idea that all content on the web should be treated equally. In a different case, a recent ruling in New York renewed debate about who can own genetic information. Myriad Genetics received patents for methods to identify women with genes that create a high risk of breast cancer. Patents involving the 2 genes made Myriad the only company able to offer the costly tests. But federal judge Robert Sweet canceled 7 of 23 patents related to the genes. He said they violate the law against patents for products of nature. Yet companies and universities often claim human genes as intellectual property. An estimated 20% of human genes have been patented in the United States. Judge Sweet said the Patent Office thinks DNA should be treated like any other chemical compound. The idea is that removal from the body and purification makes it into something different that can be patented. He said many consider this a lawyer's trick to avoid the ban on the direct patenting of DNA, but the result is the same. Cancer activists and researchers fought the patents. Myriad is appealing the ruling. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Economics Report. Changes are taking place in Silicon Valley in California. Larry Page will replace Eric Schmidt as chief executive at Google. And Apple's chief, Steve Jobs, is taking another medical leave. 2 years ago, Mr. Jobs received a new liver. In 2004, he had pancreatic cancer. The latest announcement did not say how long he might be away or give a reason. Apple reported record-high earnings for the final 3 months of last year. But the health of Steve Jobs always brings questions about the future of the company. He helped start Apple Computer in 1976. Today, the company that played a big part in the personal computing revolution just calls itself Apple. Its products include the iPod and iPhone, and its latest success, the iPad tablet computer. Steve Jobs has long been Apple's public face, but some might forget that he left in 1985 to form a computer company called Next. Manuel Perez Quiñones is a computer science professor at Virginia Tech. He says Apple has led the development of some technologies, but that explains only part of its success. For example, he says many development tools associated today with Apple came from Next. Apple bought Next in 1996. Mr. Jobs rejoined Apple and became the permanent CEO in 2000. Last May, Apple passed Microsoft in market value and became the most valuable technology company in the world. Mr. Jobs says he will remain Chief Executive Officer and stay involved in major decisions during his medical leave. But he put Tim Cook, his Chief Operating Officer, in control of daily operations. As Steve Jobs steps back at Apple, Eric Schmidt is stepping down at Google. Mr. Schmidt plans to leave his CEO job in April after almost 10 years. He will remain on Google's board of directors. Larry Page was Google's founding CEO when he launched the company with Sergey Brin in 1998. But Mr. Schmidt has been the public face of Google, while Mr. Page has mainly worked on new products. Today, Google is the world leader in Internet search and has products like the Android operating system for mobile devices. But Google is seen as trying to recapture the creative energy and speed of its early days. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. For more economic news, go to our website, voaspecialenglish.com.